Welcome everybody to today's Leaf Miner ID and recording training session. I'm Ben and I'm here at the office of the Biodiversity Information Service, or BIS, and we're the local environmental record centre for Powys and the Brecon Beacons National Park area. We cover the sort of middle of Wales, and you can see our boundary there. And in this area, we collate and manage all the different wildlife records that we receive, along with protected sites information for places such as SSSIs and nature reserves. And we make all that information available to the people who need it, for example, for planning applications and for writing management plans. We're one of 4 local environmental record centres, or LERCs, covering the whole of Wales. We're the only one without any coastline, so that does limit the marine species that we have records of. We all work collaboratively, and we call ourselves LERC Wales, and we share records so we can give people the details of wildlife records at sites across the whole of Wales, not just in our area. And that's a really good relationship we have. And as well as running events such as this and collating all the records, we encourage new recorders such as yourselves here today with events like this, Species ID days, and we also run quite a lot of recording days where we go out onto private sites to record wildlife. So you can get involved by attending our events, which you're doing now, and here's our next one, which is on Saturday, 5th of December, which is going to be winter trees. So today we're looking at things in the leaves, and then in a couple of months there'll not be many leaves on the trees, and we'll be looking at how to identify trees without their leaves. You can visit our website. There's a lot of information on there, biz.org.uk, and at the bottom of the homepage on our website you can sign in to the Biz Bulletin, or sign up to the Biz Bulletin, which I send once or twice a month by email to let people like yourselves who sign up know what's going on in the Biz area, what events and things are going on. If you use social media, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. There's our handle, as they call them, at BizBrecon1 for Twitter. And of course, after today, you'll be able to record your leaf miner sightings, as you can with all wildlife. And there's 4 main ways that you can do that in kind of order of preference. If you're a smartphone user, we have the LERC Wales app, which is part of the iRecord family. So if you're using iRecord, then we do get records using that, but we do have our own All Wales app. If you're not a smartphone user or you prefer to do things online, we've got BizWired, the wildlife recording database, which is our online recording site, or you can again use the iRecord online website for recording wildlife species. We do get all those records. If you're recording a lot of records, as for example Norman does with his moths, a spreadsheet might be the better option for you. A good place to put lots and lots of records on one sheet, and then you can send that to us. And we also still get a few records sent to us by email or in the post, but we prefer you to use one of the 1, 2 or 3 methods to get records to us. And if you are turning your wildlife sightings into biological records, then the 4 main bits of information that we need to make a biological record are what you've seen, where you've seen it, when you saw it, and who you are as the recorder. So the what, where, when and who, which you can see at the bottom of the screen there. So they're the 4 main pieces of information that we need. And just to say that today's event is one of a series that we're running on behalf of the Brecon Beacons National Park to promote some of the wildlife that makes its home within the park, such as this wood tiger moth seen by Sylvia here. And it's to promote the wildlife that lives in the park and encourage people to record it, to put it on the map. And all this is in support of the Brecon Beacons Nature Recovery Action Plan, or the BBMP NRAP. And the action plan is downloadable. On the right there, you can see the front cover of it. You can go to their website and download a copy and have a read of that. And the whole aim of the Nature Recovery Action Plan is to put biodiversity at the heart of decision making. So to make it the main focus of decisions that are made within the park. And also just to say that this event is part funded by Cliff Bar, who have given the National Park a sum of money to promote wildlife recording in national park communities. So this event is one of the series of the NRAP and the Cliff Bar event. So thanks to those for supporting this event. And thanks to you all for joining here today. And also special thanks to Norman from the Brecknock Moth Group, who's going to be our trainer today, for sharing all his knowledge on leaf miners. And just to make you aware, leaf miners made by moth species. So I'll hand over to Norman now and he can start doing his talk. I'm kind of here in Brecon at the office where we might be if we were doing this in person. And I'm kind of the control center, so I'm going to be moving the slides on. So you might hear Norman telling me to click to the next one. Just to remind everyone, I am recording this and we'll put it on our YouTube channel. Towards the end of the presentation, we tried to recreate a field trip. Obviously, we can't do that in person. So we've got a few videos towards the end, 6 short videos, but the volume on those is going to be a little bit louder than how I'm talking now. So if you are using earphones, headphones, you may want to just turn your volume down when they come on. I will give a warning again. I've left the chat on, so do add any questions that you've got there. And you are all muted, but you can unmute yourself if you do have a question. And I think Norman will say a little bit more about taking questions during and also at the end of the talk. So I hope you enjoy this presentation, and over to you, Norman.
Right, thank you, Ben. Welcome, everybody. Yes, here we are, leaf miner identification and recording is what I'm talking about. But as Ben said, it's going to be about moths, but I don't do anything else but moths, being the county moth recorder. So the first slide, just to start from the very beginning, which I think is always a good idea, we'll talk about the moth life cycle. And you have the egg, which hatches into a caterpillar, and goes to a pupa or chrysalis, and then the moth itself. And for most larger moths have large caterpillars, and they eat the leaf, the whole leaf. And that's a picture of a poplar hawk moth caterpillar eating a leaf. But some moths are quite small. Some are very small, and some are very, very small. The smaller ones do other things. Some have folded leaves that they live inside the fold of the leaf. Some have cases, a bit like a caddisfly. And some are leaf mines. Next one. There we are. And here's a leaf mine. This is what we're looking at. And this shows the life cycle really quite well. Because if you can you circle with the pointer, then the egg, the little black egg there it is, the very beginning of the mine, the little black egg. And the caterpillar burrows its way out of the egg into the mine and eats the green parenchyma between the leaves and makes a tunnel or a gallery. So there's the mine. And as it does so, it produces frass. You can see the frass inside the mine as well. Then as it goes along, it gets bigger and bigger, so the mine gets bigger too, and wider. So you come to the end, and at the end, makes a hole in the leaf and comes out and pupates in the ground. And then after a few weeks or a few months, depending on the species, it comes out into the little moth. And they are tiny little moths, very, very small indeed. So there are some words then. Next slide, please. To learn. Mine, which you know about already, the gallery, which is what you saw, a blotch, a cone, and frass. They're all the words that you need to know. Well, you need to know a few more, I suppose, but you certainly need to know all those words. Next slide. Here is a gallery, like the one you saw before, where the little caterpillar just goes in a line, a curvy line very often, but in a line, making a gallery. That's a fairly typical gallery on hazel in this case. Next slide. There's the gallery showing the frass. And also there you can see the larva. Can you see the larva? Do you want to just point out the larva? There it is. The head is there, and that's where the mouth parts are, and it'll be eating the green parenchyma of the leaf. underneath the microscope. Sometimes you can see them actually doing that live under the microscope, which is rather fun. So that's a gallery showing frass. Next slide. Now sometimes, instead of making a gallery, you get a blotch. And a blotch is where the larva eats in a random pattern around the center. It just goes around eating at the margin of the gallery, getting the mine, making it bigger and bigger and bigger into a blotch. So there are 4 blotches on that leaf. Again, that's a hazel leaf. Moving on again. This is something called a cone. You can see it's sort of cone shaped. What's happened is you can probably see there is that there's silk on the edge of the cone, and the caterpillar folds over the tip of the leaf and ties it down with silk and lives inside the cone. It isn't really a leaf miner at all in a sense, because it actually eats the lower surface of the leaf as well, just leaving the upper surface there, the brown part of it, the upper surface of the leaf. But the green parenchyma and the lower surface are both eaten. So it's not really a miner. But we find very often that some species start off as mines, then form a cone later as the larva gets bigger. You can see an old cone further on in the leaf. If you can see it, Ben. There we are. That's an old cone that's been abandoned some time ago. It may well be an earlier cone of the one on the right. So it may well be the caterpillar had made a small cone, then decided to make a bigger one as well. That's on hawthorn. Okay, next one. Here we have something in a leaf that's both a gallery and a blotch. So again, the little caterpillars made a gallery mine, quite a long one, going round and round in the leaf. And then suddenly at some stage, and we don't quite know why it happens this way, they sometimes species form a blotch, start doing random feeding. And you can see the frass is random as well. So that's both a gallery and a blotch. So I hope you can understand the difference now between a gallery and a blotch, because it's quite important when you're identifying miners that you know the difference and you can tell what they are. Now then, a question that people often ask is, what's the difference between an upper side mine and an underside mine? So the next slide. That's there's an upper side mine on the right and an underside mine on the left. If we start with the upper side mine on the right, what's happened here is that the larva has gone into the leaf and it's made itself a blotch. And then what it does is it draws together the surface of the upper side of the leaf and makes little creases, which shrinks the upper side of the leaf. What happens then, of course, is the underside bows out to make a little chamber for itself inside the leaf. And on the left-hand side, you can see what's happened on the when the mine is the underside mine. The underside surface is brought together, and you get the bowing above of making a chamber on the upper side. So the underside mine is the drawing together, but the upper side shows the bowing side. So if you turn the right-hand one over, you'd see that there's a bulge. And so the larva has got space to actually move around and eat the parenchyma of the leaf. I hope that sounds understandable. But in practice, what you usually find is that you can see the upper side mine much more easily from the upper side of the leaf. And we'll see the underside of the upper side mine later. This is getting complicated, I know, but just think about it for a second, and you can probably work it out how it's working. Normally, I'd ask people if they were following me at this point, and I'm just wondering if now is a good time to ask whether people are following what I'm saying. Would anybody like to make a question? Sue's got a finger up, a thumb up, so she's okay. If anybody is confused at this point, please ask the question. Nope, looks like people are okay. That's fine. Thank you. So where am I next? Oh, yeah, next, please. The next thing is food plants, and this is where all entomologists have got to be botanists as well. I guess most of you probably have got botanical knowledge already, and so you're probably okay on this. But it's really important for entomologists to know their botany. I know when I started out doing moths many years ago, I was about 10, I thought moths were very interesting. I thought plants and flowers were terribly boring. I soon learned my mistake that I realized you actually have to know a lot about botany to understand about moths, particularly the micro moths, the leaf miners. So once you get onto the micro moths, the difficult ones, some people think, then you'll find you need to know your botany. So for those who really don't know botany, you need to know hazel, beech, oak, birch and hawthorn, because they are the 5 in particular that have lots of leaf miners on them. I guess most of you would know those already, but perhaps if not, you really need to do so. So what I generally do with complete beginners, and I hope you aren't all beginners, but nevertheless, start with hazel, because that's the easiest one for leaf miners. Some tips to start off with. Next slide, please, Ben. Latin names. I know they put some people off. But there are some quite easy names in Latin names, things like azalea and dahlia and fuchsia. And people don't get quite happy with those, but they seem to get worried when it comes to moths. I don't quite know why. But if you start on the easy ones like Stigmella orella, that's a nice easy name. And people worry about pronunciation. How do you say it, Norman? Am I pronouncing it right, Norman? Well, it's difficult to say. Just do what you think yourself and be confident in what you say, and people will think you know what you're talking about. I find that happens quite a lot with me. Say it confidently. Stigmella orella. There we are. And the next thing is, next slide, Ben. Identification. Get the books. There are some really good books. I'll try to show you. Volume 1 of 11 of the Moths and Butterflies of Great Britain and Ireland. Only about £500 for a lot, I should think. Very useful. I bought them over years. They started out in 1975. They were going to be a volume every year. They still haven't done them all, but there we are. Or you could use the Leaf Miner website at www.leafmines.co.uk. And I find that absolutely brilliant. It costs nothing at all, of course, and is really useful. So I would make a note of that website and click onto it and have a look at it, because it really is good. It shows you the species of plants, the moths themselves, keys as well, and it also goes into flies and other hymenopterous leaf mines as well. So it's really well worth looking at. I don't know if many of you have actually seen it already, but if you haven't, do click onto it as soon as you can. That's my commercial. Next, please. And identification. You need to be sure. And sometimes people are, I know because I'm the county recorder, so I have to verify all these records. Sometimes people are a bit uncertain about some of these. If it's a common moth, of course, a county recorder will accept it quite easily. But if it's not a common moth, if it's a rare one, then there'll be questions coming back probably. And some are very easy to confuse with others as well. Some leaf mines are very simple, very straightforward. Hazel in particular has 5 that are really straightforward. But sometimes, particularly oak, has some very difficult ones. Right, next slide, please, Ben. Hazel. Here are 2 galleries. Now, all galleries, if they're entirely galleries, with one exception, and we'll come on to that exception later on, they're Stigmella something. So the first name, the generic name, would be Stigmella. So on the left-hand side, you can see Stigmella microtheriella, and she's got very long, narrow mines, and it tends to follow veins, so it likes to go quite straight. Whereas on the right, you've got a broader leaf mine called Stigmella flosslactella, broader and curvier. I know that my old mentor, John Langmaid, always tells, he usually has a name for these characteristic mines, and he calls the microtheriella, he calls it Art Deco, and he calls flosslactella Art Nouveau, because Art Nouveau, of course, all curves, all curvy patterns, whereas Art Deco tends to like straight lines and edges. It's quite nice to have things that remind you of the shapes and the things you can think about. So that's 2 on hazel. They're the 2 galleries you get on hazel. There are only 2. It has to be said though that sometimes you get galleries that look a bit like one or a bit like the other. And the best thing to do is to try and see several on the same species, and then you can be certain, because they do vary a bit. Right, next slide, please, Ben. Blotches on hazel. So where things get a little bit more complicated, but if it's an upper side mine, as you can see there, can you see that the surface of the leaf has been drawn together, and there's a bit of a crease down the middle. That makes it an upper side mine, very easy to see. That's Philonerichta coralli. Again, these blotches tend to be usually Philonerictids. I perhaps should have put the generic name on these, but I didn't. So that's Philonericta coralli. On the underside, there are two species. One is square and flattish, which is the Poronex devoniella, or a long tube, which is Philonericta nicellii. So if you think of those two there, one is Poronex devoniella, short and very often rectangular or triangular, depending on where it is in the leaf. And the other one is Philonericta coralli, which is an upper side mine. That's very, very evident now. There are lots of Philonericta coralli mines to be seen now, sometimes more than one in a leaf. And you'll see later on in the webcam presentation, some with several moths, several leaf mines on one leaf. It does seem the case that some species do like to do that. Some species you have lots of mines on one leaf, and I tend to visualize the female tiredly going from one bit of leaf to another, saying, I'll lay an egg here, another one here, another one here. Whereas other species, you only get one mine a leaf, and it's very often just one mine on one bush. And you can imagine the female going from one bush to another, saying, I'll have an egg on this bush here, and an egg on the next bush there, and they spread around. So there we are. That's Philonericta coralli, Philonericta nicellii, and Poronex devoniella. So we've gone to the next slide, Ben. Here's the other one, the one that we haven't seen so far, Philonericta nicellii on hazel. And can you see the underside of the mine? It's an underside mine, so the lower surface is the one that's drawn together. And on the right-hand side, you can see how it affects the upper surface of the leaf, how it's bowed to give the caterpillar a chamber to feed in. And can you see that at the bottom of the fold, bottom of the chamber, the green's been eaten away. So obviously the caterpillar started eating that part of the leaf, and slowly it's working northwards, upwards, into the rest of the mine, and will eventually eat all of the parenchyma. And once it's completely fully grown, then all of those the green parenchyma will have been eaten, and then it'll pupate inside the mine. What usually happens after that is that once the pupa has turned into a moth, it makes a little hole in the surface of the leaf and comes out and flies away. So that's Philonerictas on hazel. Happy with that so far? Yeah. Right. Where are we now? Oh yes, let's move on to beech. Before we do, let's talk about green islands. There are some very nice terms in leaf mining, as you've probably gathered by now. And green islands are particularly useful. This is where a leaf mine, or the caterpillar inside the leaf mine, sends out from the saliva of its mouth when it's feeding chemicals that inhibit the death of the leaf. And so most of the leaf dies and goes brown, but the little area around where the caterpillar is stays green or yellow. And it's very, very obvious in fallen leaves in the winter, particularly in in October and November. You can see green islands, and that indicates to you that there's probably going to be a leaf mine on that leaf. It's a very good way of finding leaf miners without having to actually reach up and find them in the canopy. They come down to the ground and you can see them. The next slide, on beech, now we have a really nice beech leaf. See, normally it's gone brown because it's died, but the green and yellow areas have been preserved by the secretions from the larva inside the mine. On the left-hand side, you can see there's a gallery mine that's done that. That's it. On the right-hand side, there's a blotch mine that's done that. I think that's rather nice. It just shows all the characteristics of green islands. Now, that particular leaf has stayed on the plant for the time being, but very often they do fall off. And as you say, you can find them on the ground. And now is a very good time to start walking through the hedgerows, along the hedgerows, and picking up green islands and finding leaf mines in them. Oak in particular is very good for that, and so is beech. Hazel not, because hazel doesn't really go brown in the same way. They tend to stay green, but for beech and oak, they're very good. We'll see some more later on in the presentation as well. Right, next for beech. Here are two that I've often confused in my career over the years, and I've only just realised how best to tell them apart now. The two galleries on beech. Mostly the books talk about the shape of the frass and the fact that it might be coiled in one species, not in the other. I found it very difficult to see. Then I realised that the books, in fact, the website points out a different distinction between the two. And that's where the egg starts. On the left-hand side, you can see that it starts near a vein. That's Stigmella titirella. And you can see that if it forms right back, the egg is right in the V between the two veins, the main vein and the side vein. The egg's there. Caterpillar comes out of the egg, makes the mine, and then makes a mine that's very similar to the other one. So it's a fairly similar mine. And you can see it growing and growing and growing. The frass gets wider and wider, and again it comes to the end of the mine and emerges from the hole it makes. On the other one, though, Stigmella hemargyrella, you can see that the egg is nowhere near a vein, it's in the middle of the leaf. And that's awfully easy to see, because all you need to do is look at your hand lens, of course. Take your hand lens and look to see where the start of the mine. You don't even really need to see the egg. See the start of the mine. If it's in the middle of the leaf, then it's going to be Stigmella hemargyrella. And I only just worked that one out this year. One thing as well you might find interesting is the way that I've taken those photographs. I recently acquired for my birthday this year a light box. And I find it really useful. You put the leaf on the light box and just take a photograph, and that's what you get. It works very well. So I'm finding that very useful. I was just about to put the next slide on, Ben, but of course you're doing it, aren't you? Next, please. Okay, blotches on beech. I haven't got pictures of these, but you'll just have to imagine them, I'm afraid. So if the blotch is a broad oval, a wide, broad blotch, then it's going to be Philonerichta mesaniella. More commonly, it's going to be a long tube, a bit like Philonerichta on hazel. That's Philonerichta meestingella. But also, it could be a small blotch, a bit like the other Poronyx, Devonia that you saw on hazel. But this is on beech, and it then feeds in a cone later on. That's Poronyx bugivora, if that's how you pronounce it. There aren't many records of that. I've only just been finding that recently in the county, so it would be good to find that if we could. But the other two are common, particularly meestingella. And they're the three blotches that you get on beech. And that's about it, really. So that is hazel and beech done. So if you see any leaf mines on hazel or beech, you're probably going to be able to get them down to species quite easily. Next. Now we've got something recognizable from the food plant. But again, now is probably a good time to have a little reflection of where we've got to from here. Are people happy with what I've said, or would people like to ask some questions?
If anyone does want to ask a question, you will need to unmute yourself, which you can do, and then ask your question. If not, we'll carry on, and we will do questions at the end as well. Okay. I'm finding this quite unusual, because usually I'm giving a talk and people are asking questions as I go along. And it slows things down rather. I'm probably going faster than I expected. So I've only done half an hour and I'm halfway through already. So I'm hoping there will be questions as we go along later on, because otherwise we're going to be finished quite quickly. Okay. Next, we've got some that are recognizable from the food plant. Next one, please. St. John's wort. You've seen this slide already, but if you look now on St. John's wort, and I guess you probably, all of you know what it looks like, St. John's wort, you'll very often see a little mine like this. It's got a long, thin gallery and then a blotch. And they're very obvious on the lower leaves of St. John's wort. So go out into the hedgerows again and see if you can find this. We don't have very many records, and I'm sure it's much commoner than people think. All you've got to do is look very carefully at the lower leaves of St. John's wort. You can see these from just by looking at it almost from 10 yards away. Nice little thing. And there's one difference about Ectodemia septembrella, in that it doesn't make a hole and come out of the mine to pupate. It pupates inside the mine. So it stays inside the mine throughout the whole of the winter, and next spring it'll come out as the moth. That's the only one that pupates, the only of the
nepiculide, the one to make galleries, that actually feeds inside, that actually pupates inside the mine. Next one, please, Ben. Here's one that you all will have seen, I'm sure. And I think we had one waved at us earlier on in the this morning. Stigmella orella on bramble. Now that one is you can see seems to be no frass in it. That's because it's very old. It's probably several months old, that gallery, those two galleries. And the frass has digested away, I suppose, but it certainly has disappeared. It's also very whitish as well. They tend to go white when they go old. And also you can see that the leaf has discolored around the mine. Sometimes that happens even more than that, but you can see reddish and yellowish discoloration around the mine. So that's Stigmella orella. The books will say that there are two species on bramble, but in my experience, the only one you really are likely to find is this one, Stigmella orella. So I would always accept a record of Stigmella orella on bramble as being confirmable. Very common. Well, I say it's very common, but well, no, I'll mention it later on. So we'll go on from there now. We'll mention this again on the web, on the live video that we're having later on. So we'll move on. One of my favourites, aspen. Now, aspen is fairly localised in the county, but there are a lot of good moths on it. And one of the nicest ones in my experience is this leaf miner, Ectodemia algaripesa. If you have aspen, now this time of year, go looking for fallen leaves. And they can be very colourful. I mean, this one's, the leaf itself on aspen, when it's died, goes a very dismal greyish colour. But if you've got the leaf mine, the moth lays the egg and the stem, and the mine starts in the stem and works up through the stem up to the base of the leaf, and then makes a blotch at the base of the leaf, as you can see. You can see the blotch. Can you just wave the arrow around, Ben? That's right, thank you. But again, you can see it's made a little green island. So you can see the coloration stands out in the leaves on the ground. But sometimes that green island isn't green at all. Sometimes it's yellow, and sometimes it's sort of a maroony, reddy colour. And sometimes, if you have lots of these moths on one tree, you can see lots of different coloured islands, green islands, red islands, yellow islands, all dotted around. It's very colourful. So I particularly like this one. Some years it's very common at aspen, some years it's not. And we don't quite know why. Probably something to do with parasites killing the caterpillars in some years more than others. But it can be very common. And possibly one of the reasons why it can be very numerous is that this one is unusual in moths, in this parthenogenetic. There are no males, or no males known in Britain at least. So it's only the caterpillar, the moth rather, lays eggs, and the egg hatches into a caterpillar without any involvement from the male at all. So I think sometimes you get huge numbers for that reason. That a bit like green fly. Green fly do the same thing, don't they? And you get huge numbers of green fly, and there's probably a similar kind of mechanism why you get so many of this species in some years. What to look for? Again, perhaps you might think of places where you know where there is aspen nearby, and now is a good time to go and have a look for this species. We don't have too many records because of the local nature of the food plant, and also the fact that they vary so much in numbers. We do go after that one. Right, where do we go from here? Oh yes, that was the easy part. Now we get to the complications. There are always complications in any enterprise, and leaf mines is very similar. So first of all, is the moth mine? Is there a single line or a heap of frass? If there isn't, if it's just a few dotted bits here and there, then it probably isn't a moth. And particularly if the line is double, if you get a double line of frass, then it's likely to be a dipteran, a true fly, or possibly a hymenopteran, a wasp or a sawfly. And if you can see the larva itself, sometimes that gives you a clue. You saw the shape of the larva of moths, of the leaf mine moths I've shown in one or two of the slides. But actually, sometimes you can see that the species has shoulders, like a rugby player. In that case, it's probably a sawfly. But the big giveaway is if you can find an egg. If you can find the egg at the base, at the beginning of the mine, then it's going to be a stigmella or an ectodemia. That's a very characteristic circumstance. It isn't really that the egg is all that big, because you can imagine a tiny little moth hatching into a tiny little caterpillar. The egg's going to be quite small, but when the moth lays its egg, it produces a protective coating on the egg to make it look larger. So that does complicate things. People do come and look and say, "What's this, Norman?" And it turns out to be it's not a moth at all. As people have said on holly and on ivy, usually the moths don't go for those species for some reason, and it tends to be either a fly or a sawfly. But both of those are on the website, so you can still hunt them down if you try. Next slide. A joker, the apple leaf miner. So you'd think if it's called the apple leaf miner, then it would feed on apple, which it does, of course, but lots of other things as well. So that's one of the reasons why it's a joker. The other thing is, it feeds on lots of different species. And so you can't really know, you can't really tell which species is going to be straight away, because it feeds on lots of different species of tree. And the other, well, there are two giveaways. One, you can't find an egg at the base of the mine because it's not a stigmata. And secondly, it tends to be such a large larva that it actually eats through veins. When it does that, it causes the leaf to discolor. So you have a look at the next slide. See, that's what it's done. This is the apple leaf miner on birch. And what it's done is it's crossed the veins and it's cut off the food supply from the veins to the leaf. And that meant that part of the leaf has died. So you can see it's gone from green to yellow and to brown. And if you see a leaf that looks like that with part of the leaf cut off, then it's probably going to be the apple leaf miner, Lionetia clarkella. It is quite a complicated situation because it's so common that it tends to put you off a bit. You look at a tree or a bush and find lots of galleries on it, and they're all turns out to be apple leaf miner and not a stigmata at all. That's that one. That's the first joker. The second joker is a firethorn leaf miner, Philonerichta leucogryphella. And again, it's called a firethorn leaf miner because it originated on firethorn. I think it was 2002 when the moth was first recorded in Britain on firethorn, on imported firethorns, the pyracantha. It's an upper side leaf miner, and you think it might be something else, but it turns out to be that. The trouble is that it feeds on lots of other species as well. So now when you see an upper side leaf miner on anything, the first thing you think of is it the firethorn leaf miner, which it probably is. When it came into this country in 2002, it was obviously initially really quite rare. And then it appeared that Tesco had imported a batch of firethorns of pyracantha with this leaf miner on. And you found that anywhere that it got Tesco bushes of firethorn had this species, and it grew, it spread and spread throughout the whole of Britain very quickly. And now it's everywhere. On hawthorn, on apple, on birch, I've got some in my garden on quince as well. So it's very, very common. And if you've got a firethorn in your garden, you probably find that it's got all of the hundreds and hundreds of these on the bush, and it can be quite disfiguring. You know, people do complain about it to me, so it's a problem, which it is a problem, of course. So that's the firethorn leaf miner. Right, so anybody like a break now? I think I could do a sip of water just to cool my vocal cords for a moment. So if anybody would like to have a few minutes break?
Yeah, so we stop for 2 minutes?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about that firethorn leaf miner. Does it always go up the middle vein like that? Usually,
yes, it does. That's a characteristic of it that it does, as you can see. Yeah. Well, I'm going to get a drink of water and I'll see you all in a few minutes.
Okay, Norman. I noticed there is some chat, so I'll come on to those at the end. I don't want to stop the share of the presentation in case I can't get it back up again. So I will have a look at those at the end, and then we can ask Norman about those. I can't actually see what you've asked while I'm screen sharing, so we will come back to them. And just to remind everyone, if you do have a question, then you just need to unmute yourself to be able to ask that question so we can actually hear you.
Any questions?
We didn't have any questions, Norman, but I did notice there's some chat questions, but I can't actually see those at the moment. So when we go off the screen share, I'll have a look at those, and then I can ask or see what they are, and then ask the question to you.
If anybody has asked a chat question and would like to make it verbally, then feel free to do so now. No? Okay, we'll move on then. Next slide. Yes, there are other groups of leaf miners, moth leaf miners as well, that I'm not going to cover at all, but one group is the Elychistid. The Elychistas feed on grasses. And here's a picture of one. Next slide. Feeds on woodrush, Elychista regificella. And I only know of that in one place in Brecknock, but I'm sure it's to be found somewhere else. But that's a whole group that feed on grasses. Next, mines with cases. Next, please. There's a leaf mine of a kind you often see. It's a blotch, a fairly small blotch, this time on rows, and this is the commonest of the coleopteras, as they're called, on rows. And if you turn it over, you will see that each of the mines has got a little hole in, because the larva has attacked it from the underside, made a little hole, and eaten the parenchyma out from the surface of the leaf to make the mine. Next slide. And there it is. Can you see that on the right-hand side, the little hole that the larva has made in the mine? That's where it's put its head in and eaten around. On the left-hand side, you can see the case itself. The larva is inside the case, and at the very tip of the case, you can see a drop of frass that's just about to be ejected. Yeah, that's right. So what you can see, it's quite surprising, given the size of the larva inside that case, how far it's gone into the mine. But you can see it's gone quite a long way, made quite a big, quite a long mine. But if you see little mines, little windows, or little mines as they are, on species, particularly rose, but birch is another one where they're quite common, and turn it over and you find a little hole, and you know it's going to be a coleophora. And there are lots of species of coleophora, and they're actually one of my favourite groups of moths. Not because of the moth itself. The moths are fairly boring looking, little brown things, but the larvae, and the cases in particular, are very attractive and very easy to identify. There are a couple of quite rare ones that we get do quite well in this kind of county on stitchwort, greater stitchwort. So that's a good one to look for. So the coleopteras. Next then, please. A bit about moth recording. Now that's not a leaf mine, you'd be surprised to know. That's the shuttle-shaped dart. But it's the way that I record my moths is by writing them down, hard copy, into my notebook when I see them. Now, really, for the story, it would be so much better if that shuttle-shaped dart was actually landed on the word shuttle-shaped dart. It hasn't. It landed on the word broom and ribboned wave, I think, a small square spot, and spectacle. But that's where my primary source for my records is my handwriting in the hard copy books that I retained for permanently, in fact. And it's very useful because sometimes if somebody questions a record, you can go back to the record and say, find out what you actually wrote. And earlier on this year, in fact, somebody did. They asked me, Norman, that seems an unusual record. Are you sure you're right? So I went back and had a look, and it wasn't. I transcribed it wrongly from 2012. I'd gone back to my book of 2012, and had a look to see what I'd written down. what I'd written down in handwriting was different from what I put on the computer. So it's really useful to keep a record of what you actually saw in some kind of hard copy. That's a shuttle-shaped dart on my notebook. Next slide, please, Ben. I know this has been covered already by Ben earlier on, but I might as well reinforce it. Vital information, identification, the what, the date, the place, and the grid reference. But I mean, you need both. You need both the name of where it was and the grid reference, because if you don't have both, then you can make a mistake. And it's surprising how this can happen. And I get queries from some of my records. Again, there are lots of records with moths. I do get 10,000 records a year of moths. And sometimes you do make mistakes. But then what can happen is that the verifier at the other end, the national verifier, will come back and say, Norman, this seems wrong. There's a mismatch between the grid reference and the locality, and you can have a look and see and find out what the problem was. So you do need both the place and the grid reference, and the name of the recorder. And that needs to be a name, not Mickey Mouse or John or 45321. It needs to be a proper name of somebody, so you can go back and work out who it was. Desirable, the number seen. Sometimes you can't do that. I remember I was looking at the leaf miner on horse chestnut, the one that's come in recently. It's disfiguring lots of trees in across Britain. And I looked at it and I thought, how am I going to do numbers for this? So I thought I'd count the numbers on one leaf, and there was about 20 on a leaf. I tried to count the number of leaves that were on the tree, or leaves on the branch, and then the number of branches on the tree. I came to a figure of 100,000. I thought, do I put 100,000 down? So I thought, no, I'm not going to put 100,000. Very many I put instead. I thought that 100,000 was just too difficult a number to handle. But there were huge numbers on that tree. It's a moth I'm not covering in this particular talk, because I don't have a picture of the leaf mine, but you'll probably have seen it on horse chestnut. And people are saying, well, isn't it dreadful that there's moths on the horse chestnut and killing the trees? Well, it's a nice little moth. It's very attractive, and it's part of the biodiversity of the country now. I'm not too sure. I quite like it myself. The other thing is that it's actually coming and going. We used to get it in Langorse, in the middle of Langorse, in the tree in the middle of Langorse with the leaf miner on. I've noticed the last few years it's not there. So it's not taking over every tree in the country. It's coming and going. So you learn quite a lot from things like that. So the number seen, site information and weather conditions are useful as well, but not vital. Next question, last slide. Oh yes, my checklist. What I use, in the field, you can take the books, you have your memory, or you can take what I do, use a checklist. Can you put this up, Ben?
I'll put it up afterwards, Norman. I don't want to stop the screen share.
Right, fair enough. We don't. If I just show you what it looks like, it's a page. Well, it's 3 pages in fact altogether. The first page is the gallery mines, the Nepticulidae, the stigmattas and ectodemias, and I've got on the left-hand side I've got the food plants. On the right-hand side I've got a key down to the common ones, just the common ones we get in this county. So what I can do when I go out in the field is I can tick them off as we go along, which ones they are. And it's a good way of memorizing it. Again, this is a hard copy initial data. But what you've got to be very careful about when you do that is to make sure you're actually right. And then you have to check them back when you check them and verify them when you get back home, because you can make mistakes, as I often do, I'm afraid. Next slide then. Oh, there we are. I'm describing it. Let's go through it again then. The Nepticulidae. These are flat ones. They're not inflated. They're flat mines, galleries or blotches. The egg can be visible if you place outside the mine. On page 2 and 3, there's a mixed bag with pages 2 and 3. These inflated blotches, can't see the egg, and if you place outside the mine. We'll show those later on. Is that right, Ben? We'll actually show them on the screen later on.
Yeah, I'll show those later on, and I will email them around to everybody. There's 3 pages of the Word document, which will hopefully help you identify some of the species on different trees. But yeah, you'll all get a copy of that. We've briefly looked at them there from Norman. But I can put them up on the screen later if anyone does want to have a closer look just now.
Right. I devised this just as a way of helping me to think about which species there were in the county, and helping me to start off by just doing the very commonest ones. But it's like these things very often do. It's grown and grown and grown. So I've got 3 pages now. It's all on one page at one time. But it is only a guide, and you've got to make sure that you check it with the textbooks when you get home, or the website. Okay, next slide. Story records, as I've said, hard copy is where I start off anyway. I have all of my records on hard copy initially. Then you can use standard software such as Excel. That's what I do with mine, because the great thing about Excel is that you can modify it easily. You can go back 20 years later and say, well, actually, I got it wrong, or they changed the name, or whatever it might be, and you can modify it. In some of the other software, it's much more difficult to do that, like Recorder and MapMate. I use MapMate to enter my records, but then I export them from MapMate into Excel and modify them, change them, and edit them in Excel. And of course, the local record centre biz, the Lurk app to iRecord. I'm a verifier for iRecord, so if you put things on iRecord, you'll get a tick or a complaint from me if I don't think you got it right. But it's a good thing in a way, because you will have a second opinion then as to what the species actually is. Okay, next. Or you can rear the moth if the larvae is still present, and preserve the mind. So going on to the next slide. Rearing the moth. That's what I have in my garden sometimes. Not this year it happens, but in my garden. Plant pots. So if you have a gallery mine of the stigmellas or the ectodermias, it's quite a complicated procedure, because they usually overwinter as the pupa inside the mine, or outside the mine rather. So what you have to do is you get your leaf mine, and you put it in. Oh no, start again. What you do is or you can rear the moth if the larvae is still present, and preserve the mind. So going on to the next slide. Rearing the moth. That's what I have in my garden sometimes. Not this year it happens, but in my garden. Plant pots. So if you have a gallery mine of the stigmellas or the ectodermias, it's quite a complicated procedure, because they usually overwinter as the pupa inside the mine, or outside the mine rather. So what you have to do is you get your leaf mine, and you put it in. Oh no, start again. What you do is you get a plant pot, and you put soil in the plant pot up to about halfway. Then you put moss on top of that. Then you put your leaf on top of that. You cover it over with something like your wife's old tights and an elastic band, and you put it out in the garden, and you leave it there for the whole of the winter. And then you bring the pot in the spring, and hopefully some moths will come out. They are very small moths indeed, and they're also very active. So next spring, when you're waiting for them to come out, it can be quite a challenge to deal with them, because they're running around like mad and flying around inside their little homes, and getting them out to see them properly and to identify them can be quite a problem. So they are the stigmellas and the ectodermias, the gallery mines. They're quite complicated to do. But I have had my successes. I remember one time I had stigmella floss lactella, that's the one I remember on hazel, the one with the curves, the broader leaf mine on hazel. And there were 9 of them on one leaf, which I thought was good going. It was a fairly large hazel leaf, it would need to be. So I took it home, and I actually reared 7 of them to the moth. So I got 7 moths for stigmella floss lactella from one leaf, which I thought must be some kind of record. Okay, next. But the Philodendrictes, the blotch mine ones, this is slightly easier, but again, not particularly pretty, I suppose you might say, that in your garden, but there we are. What you do here is you just need to put your leaf mine with the leaf into the pot, and put that inside a stocking, a pair of tights. What you're trying to do is to replicate the conditions that the moth would be experiencing in real life. So you want to have plenty of weather. They don't want to dry out, but they also need to be cold. They need to go through diapause, the big diapause. So they need to go really cold in the winter. and experience the day length as well, the change of day length, so they know when it comes to March or April, it's spring and time to come out, and you can bring them inside and read them out. So they're slightly more easy than the stigmellas. Okay, next. You can preserve mines as well. I use a flower press to preserve my mines, but you've got to have a data label, otherwise you forget what they are and where you got them from. So a data label for each sheet and into a file. Next slide. And that's what they look like. That's how I preserve my mines over the years. Nowadays, of course, it's somewhat easier. You can do it by photographs. So you can take photographs of mines with digital photographs, and that works just as well in some ways. But it's always nice to have the original, to be able to see the egg, to be able to see the mines, to be able to see the frass. And somehow, I find that there's something lost if you just rely entirely on photographs. I've got a large number of those mines. You can see that one was taken in Parkwood, Telegraph, Brecknock, 23rd of October 1980 something or other. So it's been hanging around in my file since the 1980s. Okay, next. Some mines to look for. Next. Right, on oak. Oak can be difficult. This is Stigmella rufocapitella. And the reason you know it is that one and not some of the closely related ones, because there are quite a few species that make mines of that kind on oak. The great thing is it's got its egg on the upper side. And we showed you the egg before. Thanks, Ben. Well done. There's the egg on the upper side. If it's got an upper side egg, then it will be Stigmella rufocapitella. Underside, and it could be one of 2 or 3 other different species, but that one is Stigmella rufocapitella. That one's in the green leaf, so it's probably the first generation. Sometimes they have 2 generations, some of these species, one in the summer and one in the autumn, and that'll be the summer generation in the green leaf. Next slide. On oak, here's something else. This is a totally different kind of mine. This is a blotch, but a slightly unusual blotch. I call this the fried egg mine. I know that Ben has another name for another one on the hazel, but I call this the fried egg mine on oak. This is Tisheria echebledella. And again, it's quite common on oak, one of the commoner mines on oak, and you want to look for. You don't always immediately realize it's a leaf mine at all until you get your eye in. That's one to go for. That's what you should find. Next slide. And here's something quite similar, another blotch mine, but this one is on apple this time, but it can be on other things as well. And look at the concentric rings of frass. That was recorded fairly recently, wasn't it, Ben? In fact, that was a record of yours. And it's the most westerly record in BIS's database. So it's not many records for the county, that one to look for. In fact, I think it was only first recorded in the county about 2 or 3 years ago. Okay, next. Stigmella laponica on birch. Birch has quite a lot of mines, and so they can be quite complicated. So there are quite a lot of Stigmella mines, or the gallery mines on birch. They need close attention to work out what they are. You can see this one's almost made a green island. The leaf itself is yellow, and the area around the mine is green. Next. Rosary herb has one very common species called Mompa rashkiella. Sorry about that, but it's a nice little moth, nice little orange and black moth, orange, white and black moth when it comes out, but on rosemary willow herb. So almost any stand of rosemary willow herb will have that on, but not that many records. So go out and find your rosemary and record it. Next. On elm. This is another Phenoricta on elm. This is the one that's on the underside now. You can see there's bowed on the upper side, so it's an underside mine. And that's Phenoricta tristigialla. Now, the sad story on this one, I'm afraid, that I was out with my mentor, John Langmaid, and he said, here we are, Norman, this one's Phenoricta schreberella. I said, I don't think it is. And I had to go and tell him, the national expert, that I didn't believe that it was actually something else. I'm sure it was that. I'm sure it was tristigialla. So I'm afraid that I have not included that record in my database. I feel very guilty about that, but there we are. And so it's got to be done, it's got to be done. Next. Another one on elm. that's quite common and one that should be around now. In fact, now is a good time to start doing leaf mines, because now is the high season for leaf mines. October is the best month for leaf mines. Some of them are not even ready just yet, not even out just yet. Some of the ones on oak and one of the one on sallow, not even out yet. So there are things to be looked for still. Now is a good time to go out and start looking for leaf mines of all kinds. One on elm. There are two species on elm. One, the moth emerges from the upper side of the leaf, and the two little hole on the upper side. The other one emerges on the underside. And you'd think it'd be easy to see which it is. It's surprisingly difficult. You've got to get a little needle and try and have a look at the flap of where it came out underneath the microscope. I find it quite difficult. But the common one is Lemniscala. Next. Now this is where things is a slightly different way of looking at things. Sometimes moths feed on plants that are quite rare in the county, like Viburnum lantanum, the wayfaring tree. And then I'm not sure, are there records in the county, Steph, do you know? Steph?
What was that?
Are there records of wayfaring tree in the county? Because I got this a little further down in Gwent.
There might be the odd one, but I think I've seen more Gilder rose, but quite often that's when it's been planted.
Well, this species sometimes feeds on Guelder rose, but mainly on wayfaring tree. So if you do see wayfaring tree, you start thinking, can I find this moth? And the problem is, if the food plant species is rare in an area, then you probably won't find the moth because there aren't enough. There's not enough to form a population. If you've got a rare species that's been there for a long time in reasonable numbers, then it's worthwhile looking for rare moths as well. So in the Wye Valley at Windcliffe, I think it was, we came across the Viburnum lantanum, and the moth itself, the leaf mines, were there in huge numbers, even though it's quite an uncommon moth. So sometimes it's worth looking for the food plants, particularly if they're good food plants that are well established in our county, but quite rare nationally. That's a good way of finding a national rarity in terms of food of leaf miners. Next. Here's something different. At first it looks like a fairly ordinary blotch, which it is in a sense. Think of, as you can see, Antispira metallella, which we do quite well for in the county. Nice little moth. What it does is, the moth lays the egg, but funnily enough, this particular species, remember, it's going to make a slit it makes a slit in the leaf to lay the egg underneath the surface of the leaf. But this particular species practices. It makes 5 practice slits first in a line, then lays the egg, and then the caterpillar hatches out and makes a little gallery. The other species, very closely related species, is something very similar, but it doesn't make the practice slits. So it's a practice slits, a little 5 rows of slits that tell you which species you've got. So there it is. It makes a gallery, then it makes a blotch, and then what does it do? It cuts out an oval. Can you see the ovals being cut out at the top? The lower oval is not relevant, but that there is relevant. It cuts out an oval and makes itself a little case. That's not relevant. That's just damage to the leaf. But that's the important bit. Makes itself a case, drops to the ground, and feeds inside the case on the ground surface on dead leaves and things before it comes out into a moth. So that's a combination of gallery with slits and a blotch, and then the hole, the cutout, is characteristic of this particular species, and it's on dogwood. So if you've got dogwood, and it's fairly common in the county, this time of year is worth looking for that leaf mine with the cutout. That's something different.
Norman, on that slide, can you see the 5 slits?
Unfortunately, on the slide you can't, I'm afraid. I think it's underneath the fold at the bottom of the leaf.
Oh, here.
Yeah, I think it's down there. I'm afraid that's a shortcoming of my my photography. Okay, next slide. And here's something entirely different. If you see something that looks like Barricus veins on oak, it's a leaf mine in the bark of oak. And until recently, we'd said that was Ectodemia atrifrontella. I only know of it in one place in the county, but we do have it in one place near Brecon on the young oak saplings of about So it's about that kind of size of the trunk. The problem is that somebody annoyingly found that there's another species that does the same thing and exists in the country, in Britain. And you can't tell which is which from the leaf mine, so you've got to breed it out. How on earth do you breed out a moth from that? I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
Chop the tree down. So we can't now record it as Ectoderma atrifrontella anymore. All you can do is record it as Ectoderma atrifrontella aggregate. In other words, it's that or another close related species. So that's very disappointing as far as I'm concerned, because otherwise that's a really nice record, I think. And rather nice to find anyway, to see that. So again, if you see any young oaks about that size, do look for the varicose veins, and you can record it as that species. Or that pair of species. Okay, next. Right, now we come to the field trip. This is where we have 6 short videos of me talking to Ben at Langorse Lake and pointing out some of the common leaf miners. We found, as Ben probably mentioned to you, that the volume is a bit of a problem because Ben was holding the iPad and talking to the iPad from quite close range, and I was some distance away looking at leaf mines. So Ben comes over loud and I come over very quietly. So to hear me, you've got to hear Ben very quiet, very loudly, and also, particularly at the beginning, some very loud and annoying bird song. Should we give it a try, Ben?
Yeah, we'll give it a go. The volume problem is more likely if you're wearing headphones, but if you're not, you'll probably be okay. But if you are wearing headphones, you might need to just turn it down occasionally.
Or brace yourself.
So here we go.
I'm here with Norman Lowe at Langorse Lake, and we're searching for leaf miners in the hedgerow. Firstly, Norman, what kind of equipment do you need to take along with you when you're looking for leaf miners?
Well, first, I think it's always a good idea to have a hand lens so that you can look carefully at what's on the leaves to find out what kind of leaf miner it is. And also, it's a good idea to have a plastic bag with you so that if you need to take any home to identify, and you just put them in the bag and take them home.
Okay, so quite simple bits of equipment needed, and then off you go. Where would you look for leaf miners? What sort of habitats are we looking in?
Well, leaf miners tend to feed very often on bushes like hazel and blackthorn and bramble. And so a hedge is a very good place to look for leaf miners. So a hedge like this here at Langorse Lake does have a number of species of bush. There's hazel here, there's hawthorn here, and there's some bramble in the undergrowth as well.
How was that? Could you all hear it okay? Some thumbs up? Yeah, great. So we'll move on to the second video, which is looking at a hazel tree and also a hawthorn. 2 miners in one here.
What have you found on the hazel there, Norman?
On hazel, we found a number of leaves with Pinnanerita coralli, which is an upper side mine. I don't know if you can see them from there. So quite a lot on 2 leaves. I think there are about 12 or 15 on the 2 leaves. And that means that a female moth has laid its eggs, quite a lot on each leaf. And that's, sometimes you get species that are communal like that. Other species only have 1 mine per leaf. But that's Pinnanerita coralli, the upper side mine.
These are the ones that I call fried eggs. So look for a fried egg on a hazel leaf.
And they're very common this time of year in the autumn.
Great, they're quite an easy one to spot.
They are. Another species of bush that has a good number of leaf mines on is hawthorn. And here we have, here are some various leaves with leaf mines on. Here's a little blotch, an underside blotch, and next to it is a fold, or a cone. And these two are both Poronex anglicella. It starts off by making a blotch, then it moves into a cone like that.
So there's 2 life stages on the leaf there?
On the same leaf, that's right. Probably the same species, the same individual.
That was the 2 species there that we looked at. Here is another fairly common one on hazel.
Here on hazel, we have a gallery mine. And this one is Stigmella floss lactella. This is quite broad mine and it's curved. rather than straight lines, which would be Stigmella microtheriella. And you might be able to see the egg on this one. It's very small indeed, so you might not be able to see it. If all, we can say that the larva has left the mine, so it's already gone down into the ground and pupated. So I'm not doing any damage to the species. If I look at the very beginning of the mine, where it's very tiny and thread-like, I might be able to see the egg. Right, it must be done on the underside of the leaf, because I can see the beginning of the mine. The egg is not there, so I'll have a look at it this way. There's the egg, on the underside of the leaf, just there.
I'm not sure whether this will pick the egg up.
It probably won't, but
that's why you need a hand lens.
That's why I need a hand lens, exactly. Just there in that vein. There.
Okay. So it's kind of in the middle of the mine.
It's between, in the angle between the small vein and the large vein there.
Okay. Oh yes, I can just see a slightly darker patch there.
That's probably it then.
And then the mine gets wider, obviously, as the larva is feeding.
As the larva grows, as it gets bigger and needs more space to feed, it makes a larger and larger gallery. And then emerges there and drops to the ground next to the cocoon and stays there over the winter until next spring.
So that covers the mines on hazel. And now the usually common one on bramble, but as we'll hear, maybe not this year.
What have you got there on the bramble, Norman?
On the bramble here, Ben, is what is usually a very common leaf mine, Stigmella aurella. As you can see, it's a gallery mine, and it's white, and there's not much frost to be seen. The reason for that is it's a very old mine. It was probably the early part of the year that caterpillar was in there, but now it's gone for many months. Now, Stigmella aurella is very common indeed, and used to be almost everywhere. But for some reason this year, 2020, it's much less common, and you don't often see it.
And now moving on to blackthorn, or other prunus species. I think this one was described as the joker in the presentation.
Is it joker number one?
On blackthorns, an interesting mine, a very large gallery mine of something called Lionetia clarkella. And it feeds on quite a lot of different species. Sometimes you think you've got a Stigmella and you haven't. And the way you can tell Lionetia clarkella is two ways, really, I suppose. Firstly, it's such a big larva, it'll actually cross a vein, which other species tend not to. So it makes the leaf sometimes go a different colour. And secondly, you can't find the egg. The egg isn't visible with Lionetia clarkella.
Has that made this leaf go brown at the edges?
We think it has. It's probably killed off that part of the leaf.
Okay.
By cutting the veins.
Oh, I see. Is that one always found on blackthorn?
No, it's found on lots of species of tree and bush. Apple, hawthorn, blackthorn, birch in particular.
Is that an exception in the leaf miner world to have various hosts?
It is quite unusual, yes. It is very common. Sometimes it's a pest species on apple trees sometimes.
And the final video.
Here on blackthorn, and the characteristic mine on blackthorn is Stigmella platypedella. The interesting thing about that is it starts off as a gallery, a very thin gallery, and then turns into a blotch. So it looks a bit like a tadpole with a tail. So we call it the tadpole mine.
The gallery is very small, isn't it? Very thin.
Very small, so it's a very small larva to start off with, and then it gets bigger and makes the blotch by feeding all the way around the leaf and leaving the frass in the centre of the blotch.
So the blotch is always that dark centre with the lighter surround.
That's right. The dark centre being the blotch, the frass.
Okay, that's the end of the presentation and videos. So now it's time for anyone who'd like to ask any questions or go over anything that we saw or discussed in any of the presentation and videos. So if you do have a question, you will need to unmute your microphone and then ask away. So anyone with a question? Sue?
This is probably a very silly question, but Norman keeps on saying you can see the egg. But if the egg is hatched into the larva, what are you actually seeing?
What you're seeing, Sue, is the egg shell and also the secretion that the female moth made around it to protect it.
Right, thank you.
That is why the egg seems proportionally far too large for the size of moth.
Right, so it's secretions as well as the actual egg then?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, right, thank you.
Steph?
Hi, Steph.
What was that last one you were looking at? That was tadpole.
Stigmella plagicolella.
Oh. And that was on blackthorn.
Blackthorn, that's correct.
Okay.
Any more questions from the audience?
Must be, surely.
I've got some information in the chat, so if there are any questions, I can run through those.
Well, we can go back to questions later on, but if you start with the chat then, yes.
Okay. We looked at the green island in the aspen, and Steph says that there's aspen in Drosstra Wood, which is the Wildlife Trust woods, not far from Brecon.
Is there?
There's some aspen in there, so that would be a good place to
I think there is.
think there.
There's also some at Pennywine.
Yes.
Another
Yeah.
reserve.
Just outside the Pennywine Reserve.
Yeah, worth looking.
And Steph also asks about parasites. And I think, Steph, do you mean parasites of the leaf miner larva that's in the leaf? The parasitic wasps that prey on these leaf miners.
Yes, leaf miners are very susceptible to those parasites. That was a research here. A book that will. Yeah. For some reason, especially the ones in blotches, I have a rather nice picture of one. Funnily enough, here somewhere. Here we are. This is a book, a very old book, by a guy called Stainton, 1850 odd. It's a rather nice book. It's in 4 languages: English, French, German, and Latin, as you'd expect. And there's some lovely pictures of leaf mines, all hand coloured. The nice thing about this one is this one here. Can you see the brown area there?
Yeah.
That is actually a parasite. So the illustrator went to the trouble of well, they actually use a real life larva, obviously a real life leaf mine with a larva inside. But that particular larva they selected had a parasite, and there you can see it there. It's not the larva, the actual moth larva itself. It's actually the parasite inside. I'm very fond of this book. It's a bit raggy. It's been eaten by mice and things, as you can probably see at the end there. But I love this book. So yes, they are very susceptible to parasites. They're also very susceptible to birds. You often find that the blotches, in particular, the upper-side blotches, have got torn because a bird's been there and taken the larva from the blotch. And also the end of galleries. Sometimes you find that there's a lovely long gallery and then a hole where the bird's taken the larva. And certainly when you're breeding out moths, I do quite a lot, breed out moths quite a lot to be certain of what the species is. As often as not, you get a parasite coming out rather than a moth.
I've got a question here from Elizabeth.
Right.
We spoke about holly and ivy and mines in those two species are often fly mines, and Elizabeth asks, do moths not mine holly and ivy because they're obviously quite glossy, tough leaves on holly and ivy, and maybe either the moth adult or the caterpillar larva don't have strong enough mouth parts? Is the leaf just too tough for those moth species?
I think that's probably exactly right. I think you're quite right that both holly and ivy have got tough leaves, and probably for very small leaf miners, they find it difficult to penetrate the integument. Also, I find that both holly and ivy, and especially ivy, have got a lot of toxins, and I think that probably puts them off as well. So why it is that particularly that some flies can manage to cope with that, I don't know, but I've never been quite sure why. I think as well that sometimes moth leaf miners don't like juicy leaves either, for whatever reason. They also don't like thin leaves. So one species of tree that's very poor for leaf mines is ash, because it's got very thin leaves. And probably some toxins as well.
And we've got a question from Laura on recording. So, for example, Stigmella aurella, which is a common species, but as we saw this year, not very commonly seen this year. And as for recording, is it helpful to record throughout the year, or would one record per year for a certain area be enough? I can answer that, but from your kind of moth perspective.
I think once you record it once in the year in a particular patch of bramble, then it's not worth recording it again, unless for some species they have 2 generations. So for some species it might be worth recording it for a spring generation and a summer generation, because they are distinct generations, and it's useful to know that the moth or the larva is there that time of year, particularly if you can say that the mine is tenanted. Because throughout the year, the period for which the larva is alive is quite short. They spend a lot of time in the egg, and a lot of time as a pupa, and very little time as a larva. So you'll find that if there's a double brooded species, then it's worth looking for the thing, say in May and again in August, or for example. It's worth having both of those, I think, for the 2 generations.
Yeah, and I think that goes for any general wildlife recording. If you say recording wildlife in your garden and every day you see a blackbird, then you needn't record that sighting every day, but maybe you would make a record every so often, every month or so. Because of course, every time you make a record, it's getting older and older as time goes on, and it is good to have more recent records. So I think it's totally up to you how often you record something, but maybe the common species record them less often, but still do record the common species, because it's often the way that the common things aren't recorded, because everybody thinks everyone will be recording them or will already have lots of records. So it is up to you. And I think, as Norman says, once a year is probably enough in terms of moths and leaf miners.
I have to say though that I've got a favourite species in my my local lane in Llangors called Coleophora lutaria, and it feeds on greater stitchwort, and it sits in the flowers, and in May you'll see it sitting in the flowers. It doesn't seem to penetrate any further west than Brecon. In fact, it doesn't get as far as Brecon in the county, but it's common certainly in Llangors on the greater stitchwort, and it comes out at the end of April and is finished by the middle of May. And I must say that every year I try to make sure that I get records of throughout that period to find out when it's coming out and when it's finishing. So I'll be recording it every few days at the end of May to find out what's going on in terms of its flight period. Super little moth.
Okay. So yes, you might have your favourite that you record more often.
Exactly.
And another one linked to recording here from Steph about moth traps. Light traps. Do leaf miner adult moths come to light traps, moth traps?
Very few. Most of them are actually day flying. They're brightly coloured and day-flying moths. So the Philomerichthys and the Stigmellas are all day-flying moths and therefore are not active at night time, so don't come to light. Coleopteras sometimes do, so you might get a few coleopteras at light. In fact, some of the records I have for some species have only got light trap records rather than leaf miner records, which is unusual for leaf miner species. So not many, but some types do. Elechistus as well come to light in small numbers. Depends on if it's day flying or night flying is really the point there.
Okay. And linked to recording, Elizabeth asks about aid gap cards or identification books with illustrations that you can use to identify miners. I know we mentioned the website, but I know you have a good book that you use, and we were hoping to feature it in a video, but that was one of the videos that didn't work, so we didn't get to see the book. But you don't have it there in front of you, do you, Norman?
Behind me, yes.
Behind you, okay. And I think it's one that is listed by host species, so by plant species.
This is the field guide to the smaller moths of Great Britain and Ireland. And the useful nature of this is that, as Ben says, whilst the species are in numerical order in the checklist, the index gives the food plant. So if you find a leaf mine on, say, birch, look at birch, and it'll give you the numbers of the moths, that all of the moths that feed on birch. You can go through it and work out which one you've got. So it's very useful in the field. So when you come across a leaf mine you don't know, you can use this to find out what it is. However, another sad story, I'm afraid, and this relates to what Ben was saying. We tried to run an exercise for the videos where I did use the book to identify something. Unfortunately, I got it wrong, so we didn't use that video.
Even the experts can get it wrong occasionally.
But that goes back to what I was saying. Try in the field, that's one thing. Make a provisional identification in the field and make sure that you check it when you get back home to make sure that you got it right. And I hadn't got it right.
In that book, Norman, are the mines photographed, or is that? I think it's just a description, isn't it, of the?
It is. So let's have a good one, shall we? Oh, here's a nice one. Callisto denticulella. So the egg apparently is to be found only between between June and July, 6 to 7. The larva, when young in a fine gallery in the upper epidermis of the leaf, mainly on apple, later goes to a blotch, looking like a Philomerichthys, and then in 2 or 3 successive folds spun down on the edge of the leaf. So there's 3 different forms of leaf mine for Callisto denticulella. And then the pupa is in the folded edge of the leaf on the ground, and the imago, the moth, flies between April and July. So all of that's listed for that particular species. And Callisto denticulella is something you will find on your apple tree if you've got apple in your garden. It's one to look for. And I've got it in my garden even now.
So the book is more descriptive, and I think the website is more images on the website, more photographs on the website. Very
good photographs and keys as well.
Yeah.
So on the website you can look at your species by food plant. So if you've got on oak, you can have all the things on oak, or you can look at it if you think you can know what the species is. You can look at the individual species as well. That's listed as well. There are keys as well. So there's mine keys for the various species as well.
Okay, and Laura also says that Micromoth Field Tips book is a nice photographic guide. Micromoth Field Tips, you know that one, Norman? It's probably, yeah, on your bookshelf. That must be one that Laura uses and obviously finds it very useful.
It's a very useful book when you're bored to tears and you've got nothing to do and you don't know what you think of mothing at any time of the year, January, December, August, whatever it is, here are the species to look for in that particular month. So I remember one January deciding to do that because the moths weren't flying. Of course, it was too cold, and I had great fun reading out a moth called Epinosia immundana. on alder, on the alder catkins. So yes, it's very, very useful book. Moth, micro moth field tips.
Okay, thanks, Norman. I will get the title and author of all these books and email them round to you. We also have, oh God, do you want to ask your question, Steph? You'll have to unmute yourself. There's a couple more in the chat, which I'll come back to.
And Sue's got a leaf she's banishing as well.
I was just wondering, because on occasion you go on leaf miner walks, Norman, with the Moth group or with other groups. Is there anywhere that you haven't explored in the county that you think needs exploring?
The answer to that question is probably down to the individual, to all of you, to find places that have got habitats that you would like to look at. Which I don't know about. I haven't been everywhere, of course, so local knowledge is very useful. What we're looking for is places that have got long established bushes and groups of bushes of different species. So if you've got an area where you've got long established hawthorn, blackthorn, oak, birch in particular, then just look and record. And wherever you are, they're valuable because you're probably going to be recording where nobody else has. Only a small number of places have been systematically looked at. But yeah, anywhere at all.
Okay, thanks, Norman.
Claire's waving.
Claire, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I was just going to say that Montgomeryshire, on the Moth Group Facebook page, Douglas has been doing a leaf mine of the month. So he's put up details about something to go out and look for that's active in that month, and that's been bringing in quite a lot of new records. We've had a few new county records from that as well. So
good idea.
Yeah, he's doing it as a bit of a competition, but there aren't many people doing it. So and one of the one on hazel, there was a bonus point for the person who found the hazel leaf with the most blotch mines on it, which I think Tammy won because she got 20.
That's a good lot. That's a good lot. 20.
Yeah, so that's worth having a look at as well.
So that's the Montgomeryshire Moth Group website.
It's on the Facebook page and also on the blog. There's something, I think you post something on the blog. So yeah, on their website, the blog part of it.
Okay. I'll send that website round as well.
Yeah.
But we could have moth of the month or leaf mine of the month anyway, couldn't we, Ben?
We could do that. Yeah, we could put that out on social media.
Yeah.
I'll answer this question from John Wild about where to send records. John sends his records to Pete and Ginny, who are the county recorders for moths in Radnorshire. And he does that every month, which is great. Thanks for that, John. But he asks that should he send these to Biz or anyone else as well? I know that all the county recorders do send us all their records every year, or maybe more often, but at least annually, John. So we will get your records at some point. I know Pete and Ginny send them once a year, I think. So we get a big list of records for them annually, kind of at the end of the season. So yes, your records will get to us. There's no need for you to send them to us as well, but if you wanted to, you could do. We do have ways to get rid of the duplicate records, and as I always say, it's better to have 2 records of something than none at all. But I know Norman definitely, and Pete and Ginny and Radnorshire definitely send their records to us. So yeah, just keep sending them to your county recorder if that's what you do at the moment.
Yes, Pete. I mean, certainly for Brecknockshire, I would say please send them to me. And I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you with any comments I have, and I usually do get back. Usually just saying, what a good record, or no, I don't believe you, it's something else. Whatever it might be, I'll be back with a comment. But the fact is that the records, all records, need to be verified by the county recorder before they can should be accepted into the national database. So please send it to the county recorder in Brecknockshire. That's me.
And Jill Wild asks about miners on trees and shrubs? And if you get enough of them, can it actually cause any damage to the host species?
I don't think that's very common at all. The only time when there might be an issue is in orchards, for example, where it might affect the yield. The best example of this, I think, is it's not a leaf miner, but it's something that apparently causes damage to bird cherry, the bird cherry ermine. And sometimes the bird cherry ermine is so common that it covers the whole of a bush, a whole of a row of bushes in silk, and takes all the leaves off in, say, May or June. And it looks as though it's causing real damage, but actually it's not, because once the larvae have gone, have turned into moths, then suddenly the bird cherry branches out again, and you wouldn't, by the end of the year, you wouldn't know the difference. So even with a really heavy infestation like that, it doesn't seem to affect the tree or the bush. So I would say no, unless, again, the other species that might cause a problem, or type of species, is the non-native ones, the ones that just come in. Sometimes they can, like the horse chestnut one. But again, I think the horse chestnut will come back.
Yeah,
Personally, I think the horse chestnut leaf miner is a nice little moth. Orange and gold stripes, lovely.
you tend to find that these new species, that you find the balance, and they increase and decrease, and they kind of find the right balance, and they don't actually kill the host species, which of course you don't want to do if you want to be a successful organism.
But I think that's the balance between the species and its parasites. So the parasites will eventually come in, or the parasites or the diseases will eventually come in and regulate the numbers, yes. Yeah. Like has happened in Langorse at the horse chestnut tree in Langorse, where it's free of the moth now, and I don't quite know why, but that mechanism does happen. Claire.
Yeah, I was just going to say they've been just studying that, haven't they, with the horse chestnut leaf miner. CEH were asking people to put the leaves with leaf mines in a bag and send in what emerged, how many moths and how many, if they got any parasites.
Right.
So they've done that study this summer. So I mean, I didn't get any parasites. I got the moth, but that'll be interesting to see, because I think then they'll map how far the parasites have spread.
Yeah.
So something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that's a good kind of citizen science project that you get involved in. And going on to life cycle, Elizabeth asks about the length of time it takes for a moth to complete a mine.
Right, that's probably a much shorter time than you might expect. I think it's a matter of a week or two, or perhaps a small number of weeks, I think, because it's surprising how infrequently you find a mine that's actually got a larva in, because they seem to produce their mines very quickly. So as I think I said before, the longest time they seem to spend in the life cycle is in the egg or in the pupal stages. I think the moths only last for a few days or a small number of weeks. The larva is a fairly short-lived thing as well. It feeds very quickly. So I think the answer is not very long.
Okay. So the larval stage is quite a short part of the whole life cycle of the micromoth.
Yes, it's the feeding stage as well, of course.
Yeah. Elizabeth?
Just coming back to the parasites, I think I might have missed this. Are the parasites always things like wasps or sawflies, or is there other insects that parasitize the mines?
There are flies as well. So you can get dipterans that parasitize moths, and hymenopterans, and hymenopterans of various kinds, the sawflies and the custard wasps, that kind of thing. Very tiny ones.
They parasitize them in terms of eating them, or are they laying their eggs in that sort of?
They penetrate the mine and lay their eggs inside the larva.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. That's all for the chat. So has anyone got any questions they want to ask now? No, I think that's it, Norman.
Do you want to put on the
Oh yeah, I can screen share the ID sheets that you made. Here is one for the blotches.
Right.
Can you all see that? This is, I'll send you a copy of this. So this is something that Norman's made.
So on the left-hand side, you can see the species of tree or bush. On page 1 of these things, I've got deciduous oak, birch, hazel, and elm. So hopefully a blotch on any of those will be covered by this key. But again, it doesn't have everything. It can't possibly have everything. It's only got the ones that are likely to be found in Brecknockshire. And sometimes you'll see this, for example, about a quarter of the way down, number 3 of the oak. I say, difficult identifying the field. It could be Harrisella, Hegariella, Quercufoliella, or Messaniella. And you can't really do them in the field very easily at all. So those ones you can't do out there. But at least you know it's one of those 4. Otherwise, most of the other ones you can do down to species, I think. One group of moths that we haven't covered at all is the Eriocranias. And they make blotch mines on birch in the spring, in about April time. And that's a very good way of recording them, because the moths themselves are difficult to identify. But the mines, as long as you need the larvae inside them as well, that can be quite easy. That's a good way of identifying and recording Eriocranias. And in general, I have to say that leaf mining recording is an easy way of recording moths. It's not quite as easy as moth traps, but it's almost as easy. You just fall out of bed, you roll out of bed, and you roll into the garden. You look at a few leaves, and there you've got some species, the commons, just like that.